All right, you happily miserable accursed. Let's get this pod underway today. Herle here with, let's face it, Canada's goddamn best political panel. And by best, I mean best insights in any form of media, podcast, or otherwise. Best ability to put form a cogent argument in an entertaining way. And best hair. Hey? Really? Look at this group. Look at this group. Even Reid's piece. Right?
Is it on? Straight Christ, the other day it was all over my right ear, and then anyway.
All right, Jordan Leichnitz, Kory Teneycke, and Scott Reid are here in one way or another, some form or another, some shape or another. Today on the show, we're going to do an inventory of what each party's imperative should be between now and Christmas. And our cursed clipping is from Justin Ling, contributing a long-form analysis to the Toronto Star of how the Liberals fumbled Canada's most effective climate plan. And finally, what are the implications of polls showing the Bloc Québécois strong in Quebec and the NDP ahead of the Libs in the rest of Canada? Then, as always and forevermore, the great Gordon Pinsent and our Hey Yous. Kory, Scott, Jordan, it is a beautiful fall day here in Denholm, Quebec, and the Riders are winning, so all is good. You?
Yeah, I've been in better shape, so I apologize in advance to everyone. I was at a wedding till about 2 a.m. last night, so I'm in Edmonton in very partially okay form.
Right. You look good, Kory. You look good. You look better than Scott, and Scott doesn't have the same excuse.
No, I was up to 10 o'clock, reading a story to my son, then falling asleep in his bed, like I often do, then waking up at 2:30 and thinking, gee, I need to pee, but I won't, and then go back to bed, and then not really sleep, just roll around dreaming of standing under a waterfall, and then waking up and go, Jesus Christ, what's going on? That's my night, every night.
The glamour.
Scott, wow. I thought you had been up late last night, as I was, listening to Chris Christopherson.
I did, yes. Yeah. I did listen to a lot of. I noticed a shirt. I love Chris Christopherson, as you know. I love Chris Christopherson. Silver-tongued devil, just slipped from the shadows.
Also, just good human, like
total Renaissance man.
Yep,
complete.
Yeah, amazing. All right,
Toby Keith's story may or may not be true. I choose to believe it is true. I like it a lot. Fuck Toby Keith! Hooray, hooray, hooray for Chris Christopherson.
All right, let's do this. First of all, it's National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, so let's acknowledge that before we start. We will all be, I'm sure, commemorating this day in one form or another. Although I don't have a single orange thing to be wearing this morning, otherwise I would.
I got a new Oilers jersey that is mostly orange, but I'm not sure that'll count.
Not sure that counts.
No. Although I think there were special jerseys, at least in the CFL, there were special jerseys for Truth and Reconciliation Day. Everybody came out with Indigenous-inspired logos.
I'm like you. The orange.
You're not moved by that.
Just I can get.
You're not moved by that, Jordan.
I mean, I just I think everyone should consider paying people today. Like, the orange T-shirts are great, but I planned. I'm planning to make a donation to some of the folks, the Indigenous folks doing some work locally, and also there's an amazing amount of great kids books now on residential schools and that. So we're cracking through a few of those this week with the kids. So yeah,
excellent, very good stuff. Okay, so I thought we might look ahead this week because looking back is a pretty desultory exercise. So we're at the beginning of the end, right? An election is very likely in the next 12 months, and now it appears quite possible in the next 6 months. Polling consensus seems to have the CPC with a 20 or so point lead in the low to mid 40s, maybe 50 points in English Canada. The Liberals back in the low 20s with the NDP hanging on in the high teens. Our lead topic today is, what does each of the major parties need to accomplish this fall to be as ready as possible for an election campaign? Let's start with the Liberals, and I'll start. Give you guys something to chew on. I'll start. There's a lot of needs here. They obviously need to raise some concerns about Poilievre, perhaps most importantly, and they need more money. But most of all, they need a new story. And with no leadership change on the horizon and no guarantee of a budget before the election, that puts all the pressure, in my view, on the fall economic statement. That document needs to provide the government with an economic narrative that they can take to the people. That means both a story and accompanying measures, in my view. In particular, the fall economic statement, in my view, needs to have a tax cut that people will feel and believe in.
Well, I should have gone first because now this is going to sound pretty repetitive. Damn you, Herle.
Really? All right.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead. What do you think? I think the Fez needs to change the story that they tell to people about the economy, and it needs to start with a tax cut.
Is that it? That's
it.
Okay. I agree with you. That's literally what I was going to say. And then I think there's some added interesting things they could do. Like, I wonder if you bring in a Fez, I think you have to do a middle-class tax cut. I seriously, particularly unless they think that the prime minister is going to step down, which is a real opportunity for rejuvenation. So I assume we have to work on the assumption he's not. Then I think that, you might want to also announce some mechanism that allows you to retreat from the carbon tax, some mechanism of study, something that allows you to sort of report back early in the year prior to April 1st that allows you to move from a consumer carbon tax to cap and trade mechanism, pay the way for that and signal clearly that you're doing it and begin the retreat. And I actually like the idea of beginning the retreat in steps, because if I'm the government, I want people talking about the fact that I've retreated for months so that people actually start to think that I've retreated and believe it. And maybe then maybe prorogue the House. Let them have a few opposition days, give them a confidence vote on the Fez, and then prorogue and signal your retreat from the consumer carbon tax. These are kind of more or less the assembly of the same things we've recommended that have gone wholly embraced by the government for months, but that's my prescription as well.
Yeah. Jordan, what would you do if you were the Liberals this fall?
Yeah, well, I mean, the cheeky answer, of course, is that they need a new leader, and it's really tough to talk around that constraint, because I think that the pool is just so tainted right now with Trudeau as leader. It's really difficult to imagine him carrying off a different message. And I am struck a little bit like Scott that I think you guys have both expressed a lot of these same hopes about every budget and every fiscal update. And it's not only, I think, that they seem unwilling to go down that path, they actually seem not able to cogently execute it. And I think we can go back and look at the last budget for that. So, they obviously tried to create a bit of a wedge with capital gains and make that a bit of a centerpiece. And they let out that this was a grand plan to rise 5 points before summer. None of these things happened. The government was not disciplined enough necessarily to carry out, sort of focused messaging on it for longer than any longer really than 2 or 3 weeks. And it all disappeared under the waves, including that little 5% boost hope. So I think that there's a challenge both conceptually, in which it's clear that any type of a change strategy is not being embraced by the PMO, but there's also an execution level challenge where it seems like they don't necessarily have the capacity right now to use the fall fiscal update or potentially a future budget as this type of a vehicle. They don't have the spokespeople for it. They don't have the internal communications muscle to execute it, and they don't have the discipline to stick to it for long enough. And then, of course, they don't have the contrast muscle to draw what you need to do, which is to draw your opponent into that as a contrast piece in order to derive any real benefits from it. So I guess I'm saying a whole lot of things that I don't think that they have the capacity to. What should they do? I think that the first piece is they actually need to go back to the more conceptual level there, and they need to make a decision to run a bit against their own record. They have to make a decision internally that they are going to communicate change, even with their existing players. They need to identify some things that have not gone well and say that they will do things differently. And I think that without that decision, they are just not capable of breaking away from a narrative that's not serving them right now. And I think we had a little discussion in our chat group earlier this week about the notion that the Liberals are getting beat all around the bush on this because they are not communicating hope adequately. And I think it just really couldn't be further from the truth. Like, a big part of their problem right now is that their communications has become so detached from how Canadians are feeling about their lived conditions right now that it seems like they're out in space. So they have to reconnect that somehow. And that does mean, I think, when your electorate has an overwhelming appetite for change, you can provide a path for that change, or your opponent can. And right now it's open season for everybody else.
Yeah. The only place I've really seen them do that is on immigration, where Miller has acknowledged that they were on the wrong track in a number of areas, which they, and he's been breaking from the, we are continuing to do, as we've done from 2015, the following things. I don't know if it's diffused the immigration issue any in the country, but I don't sense he's under the same kind of attack on a regular basis that he might have been if he was sticking to that other messaging.
Yeah, but I would say he's been lonely out there in that strategy. You're really not seeing that from anybody else, and certainly not coming out of the PMO.
Right.
Just Corey, before Corey goes, because I want to
give him as much time as possible to gather his thoughts.
I just exactly, and his energy and his pH levels. No, I was just interested because I thought something, just looking at Jordan, thinking about New Democrats, looking at the proposal you put forward, same thing as me, which is use the feds to put a tax cut in. Like, I'm struck by EB, right? EB this weekend, what's he come out with, right? He comes out with a tax cut. And, there's a broader story here, which is interesting. This is why I also think the Liberals have to do a tax cut, because they have to crack this nut. The people do not
buy. But promising one in an election campaign would do nothing for them.
They've
got to deliver one.
But I think there's something even more fundamental, which is the fight has been lost on program promises and the promise that programs will result in middle-class benefits. Maybe, hopefully, I think probably truthfully, those benefits will accrue to people and they will see them over time. But when the Liberals say, well, what we've done for you is dental care and pharmacare, and we've done this with the child, people don't feel it. They don't believe it, because those things. And I think EB, as a New Democrat running in British Columbia for his life, trying to save and keep a hold of his government, being really, it's a very competitive election. In some ways, that tax cut tells us that the left, the center has lost that argument on programs, and that if you want to connect with middle-class voters, you almost have to resort to a tax cut to persuade them that they'll be beneficiaries, that too many people will assume that they are not the beneficiaries of a programmatic approach. And yes, you can make arguments that, well, you know what, we can do so much more with the same amount of money or even a little bit less by targeting it, but then people believe that they're not the beneficiaries of it. And I just think EB's tax cut proposal is in some ways a concession by the center-left that this argument has been lost. And I think the Liberals need to come to grips with that in their fall economic statement as well.
Let's start with a reminder. Last week in this space, I talked about how a Canadian technology company is taking action on an all-new innovative initiative to address the housing crisis in this country. Today, I want to drill down on the action part of it, Hurley-Burleyites, with 3 live projects our presenting sponsor, Telus, has going on in BC. The initiative, if you recall, is Telus Living, and the goal is to build now. Taking Telus' own real estate, once dedicated to copper wiring and now freed up with the advent of fiber optic cable, and repurposing it to build mixed-use rental residences that address urgent housing needs community by community. The first 3 are already underway. Nanaimo, with 200 units featuring integrated smart home technology and amenities specifically designed to fit the stunning island community. Seashelt, 150 units, designed with a heightened focus on eco-friendly materials, cutting-edge connectivity, and with a diverse mix of unit sizes to house essential workers like teachers and emergency personnel, as well as young families. And Saanich, 250 units, aimed at housing middle-class families and essential workers in the community. All units feature smart home technology and prioritize sustainability and green building practices. So why is Telus even in the housing game? I mean, they're not a property developer, right? The simplest way I can put it is this. Telus has always been a values-driven innovation company dedicated to improving quality of life in the communities they serve. In this case, a critical need met with a unique opportunity to take Telus's own property and upcycle it, leveraging their commitment to sustainability to create connected, smart living spaces the working middle class can afford. These 3 communities are just the start, Hurly-Burlyites. More on this next week. Kory, what do you think?
Well, you guys have covered a lot of ground there, so I'll try not to go over it again, but I agree with most of what has been said. I'll add in a little bit on the tax cut thing. Like, I think the other problem with this government, and I was reminded of it the other day watching TV and seeing an ad on their dental care program, that most of the shit they've done doesn't apply to many Canadians who they need to have vote for them. And so doing an ad, even though you make the mom and the kid look like they're, upper middle class in terms of their means, the end of the ad, it's like, if your family makes less than $90,000 combined income, this might do something for you, which is for most Canadian families not going to be it's not very persuasive because it does not apply to them. Too niche and too targeted and too means tested to actually be applicable to the voters that they need to actually have vote for them. And so, I think it's just too narrow in scope. So add me in on the tax cut thing, but I would say, in addition to that, stop doing these shitty little piecemeal means tested programs that apply to little thimbles full of voters here and there. Like, there may be a benefit in terms of, doing more for people who are lower income. Sure. Okay. But politically, they need to start doing things for the massive swath of middle income Canadians because they're the ones who are going to throw them out of office. The second thing I'd say is, that I don't think you guys touched on, is if you're going to keep Trudeau, you need to bring his numbers up, which is a very tall order. But you can't be the most hated person in the country and also the face of your party going into an election campaign where no one's going to listen to anything you have to say. And so if you're not going to change him, you've got to change the way people think about him, which in my view is to still go back to something that's more sunny ways. Don't be the pissy, chippy, condescending prick version of Trudeau, who we've basically seen since the O'Toole election campaign. I think they got to go back to something that's more like the Harper era Trudeau, which is sunny ways and some hope and optimism for the future. But if you're the prick version of Trudeau, I don't think there's no tax cut in the world that's going to get you out from under the level of animosity directed your way.
So that's super interesting, that last point, because, my old colleague, Kyla Ranellenfitch, did some more research, which she published last week, which is really fascinating read, about Poilievre's strengths and weaknesses and where Poilievre might get attacked. And, Kyla is a veteran of the 2018 Ontario provincial election. And her read of the data was a very strong cautionary warning to Liberals that if you go at Poilievre right now, there is no guarantee the votes go Liberal. Mm-hmm. Right? If you move votes away from the Conservatives right now, they may well go NDP.
I think what's really interesting about her research as well is that she shows that the constellation of issues where Poilievre is vulnerable, and her research corroborates, I think, all the other research likely you have all seen and we have all seen, which is that there's no silver bullet, right? There are some things that work slightly better than others, but there's not one kind of magical thing. And so the issues where there is vulnerability in her testing are issues around cutting programs like pharmacare, dental care, things like that.
But mostly healthcare.
Healthcare. And
mostly healthcare. Take it up a notch. Take it up a notch.
Absolutely a vulnerability for the Liberals, because now if you look sort of nationally, Liberals are trailing third to the NDP in terms of who is most competent on healthcare. So there's a risk that your most effective negative messaging actually drives voters to your opponent. And I think, anyway, I think she's obviously very alive to that because of the 2018 experience, but it's an interesting conundrum for them.
Well, this is where sort of operational competency is important, not on one particular day or week or month of a government, but the narrative around the incompetence of this government to deliver things that it says it's going to do, it really, I think, has excluded its ability to campaign on a lot of the positive measures that you might put in a budget or a fall economic statement or something. Just nobody buys that it's going to happen, or that they're going to be affected by it in a positive way. So I don't know.
Scott, does this situation with the NDP cause you to reconsider? We've been calling for negative ads, all of us, negative ads on Poilievre for a long time, but does it now change your thinking about timing and phasing? Do they need to have positive ads about Trudeau first?
Well, you guys probably don't think there's any way for me to get angrier or more melancholy about the circumstance the Liberals find themselves in. But this insight, which I think is undeniable, and, looking at Coletto's number 2119 and just thinking this is nightmare positioning, right? It just feels like, not sure that with people still not fully dialed in on politics, that the Liberals have actually hit rock bottom, and the conditions are there for a flip, even though the NDP, I think, have structural problems with their own leader in terms of his public appeal. But you look at it and you go, this is such a situation of jeopardy, which takes us to this question of advertising. And it makes me, this is not a productive comment, it just makes me further bitter about the fact that advertising didn't happen a year ago, because now that absolutely essential tool might not be available. And it probably, to unroll it now,
it would have played so differently, you guys. When it was 30-30 between the two parties, it would have played so differently than it plays when it's 20-45.
100%.
100%. Yeah.
Anyway, we are where we are. So a party that has a leader that isn't popular, that is pursuing a policy program that isn't resonating with middle-class Canadians, that sees its vote deteriorating to 21%, according to one last poll, is now robbed of the political option, ostensibly, of attacking their popular opponent for fear that will further erode their own vote. Or at minimum will reward one of their other opponents. And you're sort of like, well, what? I got a bag of ash and a compass. Good luck getting out of the woods.
Well, they're damned if they do and damned if they don't, right? Because this is the challenge. Like, there's no chance unless they're able to negatively define Poilievre. That's, I think that if there's any hope left in the Trudeau camp that events and twists and turns could change the path for him personally as leader and their viability in the next election, it has to go hand in hand with obviously taking down Poilievre's numbers. So it's really a chicken and egg problem for them. Whether they can do that negative advertising and then deal with the NDP on the other side, maybe. I don't know. But
your JSWoodsworth.com internet is starting to really gum up there, sister.
Oh, is it? Well, anyway, just to say, I think it's a really impossible decision for them, because I don't think you can go positive until you carve out some space with contrast.
I disagree with that. Like they have to improve his numbers. Like, I think just going negative is not going to do it for them at this point. And like the most obvious thing to do is change Trudeau. And clearly that's not where they're at right now. But I think we're.
That's not where he's at right now. There's no they. Every they I know is exactly where you are, Kory. I just don't.
Wouldn't you guys say that maybe there's evidence of that, Kory, your strategy had been embraced by them over the summer? When you take a look at the subtle difference, I mean, they didn't employ advertising, but you look at the sorts of things they put him in, places where he's being warmly received, smaller crowds, real enthusiasm. He was trying to generate positive 2015 type energy. Like, I see evidence that maybe they agree with you, but they're not putting money behind it.
Well, but also not with the level of consistency that is required in order to get the job done. Because you can't go in and throw haymakers in question period if that's if that's what the strategy is. I agree there were signs of that over the summer, but
didn't they abandon it with the failure of the summer, and they went to Trudeau Unleashed? Now we've got Trudeau Unleashed.
We have a negative Trudeau, which I think is quite counterproductive for what they need to do on his numbers.
But Trudeau Unleashed is like, Trudeau Unplugged, Trudeau, raw, whatever, however you want to say it. It is the least good Trudeau. It really is. It's really the least good Trudeau. So anyway, I don't know. I think by March, if they go through the carbon tax increase in 1st of April that they're planning to, I think we're going to be here talking about whether or not there will be a Liberal Party after the election. Like, I think it's that bad. Like, whether or not we're talking about a 1993 PC level defeat in which the party is a smoking hulk of on the side of the road, and you're talking about, like, do we have enough seats to form official party status? And the answer is no. Like, I think that's the level of problem that we're dealing with at this point.
I was talking last week about the physics of a freight train. It was pretty interesting, I thought, so I'm going to talk about it again. When the engineer in the locomotive applies the air brakes, a phenomenon called slack occurs. Remember, the train might be a mile long, a seemingly endless parade of rail cars, all linked to one another. Basically, they don't all slow down in perfect harmony. They can bunch up and then stretch out. A bit difficult to explain maybe, but crucial to understand in the execution. That is why all CN's Canadian engineers, and for that matter all Canadian CN railroaders, start out at the CN campus in Winnipeg. Think of it as basic training for railroaders, or maybe a railroad academy. It celebrated its 10th anniversary this year. As I said, all Canadian CN railroaders start at the campus, no matter where they are stationed in the country. The campus is big, about 100,000 square feet, and it educates about 300 trainees a week. Each of them is fed the whole multi-course CN safety meal. The campus actually has a slack simulator to help new railroaders understand the braking issue and practice before they get into a real locomotive. It also has locomotive simulators. Students can train in virtual reality. The campus regularly stages the derailment of a train carrying dangerous goods and invites local first responders to participate. Train cars can be lit up to simulate a fire in a controlled environment. It's all in furtherance of the Grail. No accidents, no injuries, no fatalities. But CN cannot get there without you. So let me repeat something else I said last week. Stay away from trains and tracks. They are dangerous, writ large. Respect the behemoth. All right, let's shift our focus for a second to the Conservatives, who maybe they don't have to do anything. Maybe their situation is perfect, but they are always thinking about how to improve their situation. So if you were in their shoes, let's start with you, Kory. What would you be doing this fall?
I think you want to continue to call for non-confidence in the government at every chance that you get, and force either the Bloc or the NDP to rescue the government. What I think is so telling in the fundraising numbers that came out fairly recently was the amount of cash on hand, like $16 million for the Conservatives, $2.8 million for the Liberals, and like $280,000 for the NDP, which just to put in context is about how much we spent in Ontario on Game 7 the Leafs series in the playoffs. Like we spent about that amount of money on one hockey game for ads. So to say that that the NDP are going to be forced to try to keep
you were wise to buy
around,
the early rounds.
Yeah, I think. Yeah. But like especially if your electorate is in Ontario. But anyway,
I think Kory really underestimates how scrappy the federal party is. They've done more with less.
Right. Okay. But unlike the NDP federally, I don't think politics you should be going in to lose, which seems to be kind of what the NDP's MO is federally, unlike their provincial cousins who actually fight to win. And we saw that in spades this past week when we were out in BC.
Yeah.
But like there is such a difference in terms of competency and ability to prosecute an election campaign at the provincial level for the NDP than there is at the federal. But all of that to say, if I were Poilievre, I would be putting that in the window every chance you get, that this is a very unpopular government that has been propped up and kept alive by Jagmeet Singh. And I would want to have that in the window every chance I have between now and the election campaign, so that you are the only voice of change. You are the one who's actually going to take the government in a different direction. I don't think the Conservatives have topped out. When we're saying that the Liberals haven't bottomed out yet, I don't think the Conservatives have topped out. I think there's still more votes there to get. And I would be chasing them and saying, like, look, we're the only ones who are actually going to be a platform for change. So the only other thing
about 9 months ago, Kuvalis told me that the Conservatives were headed for 50 points, and I dismissed it. But
yeah, I think minus Quebec, like, yeah. I think that's very realistic. If you're carving Quebec out of the equation, that's where they can go.
Why would they? That would be my answer. Why would they carve? That's where I would go if I were them. I'd go. Well, I think it's the unconquered territory. Let's go get Quebec.
Well,
it's a harder row to hoe.
It's harder, but look, the other thing that I would say is, sort of advice from the peanut gallery is starting to think about, how you position yourself for after what you get into office. And I don't think that the Poilievre needs to be as negative in terms of being the face of the party in this fight to get the job done. Like I think I would try to protect him a little bit more in terms of his image, and like the image in the latest ad that they put out, I think is bang on where they should be. It's it's agent to change, but it's more hopeful. It's like the day is dawning sort of imagery. It's like him and his family. It's a softer presentation of him that is more forward looking and more positive in nature. And I think that's really good, as I think people will fill in the blanks on the negative stuff around Trudeau themselves at this point. You don't need to, be as harsh on it if you're the leader to get where you need to go and where you are.
Yeah, I really think that is that to me, that's another learning from the Brunel and Fitch research, which is that, time for a change is well established. Opinions of the government are well established. Poilievre is still not well established. There's not negatives out there. He's not hugely vulnerable, but there's a shitload of soft opinion about Poilievre, of people that don't know very much about him, are still forming opinions. And what does her data show? Her data shows that when he presents himself in some ways, people recoil from it a bit. And when he presents himself in other ways, people are drawn to it quite a bit. So to my mind, I don't know exactly how they're allocating their buy, but I would be putting way more of my media buy toward promoting Poilievre and insulating him against whatever attacks are going to come than I would on driving more negative about Trudeau. Jordan, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with a lot of what Kory has said there. I think softening his image is probably crucial. There is still, while his numbers are very high, it's not it's not that he's loved, right? There's still vulnerability in his personal numbers. And that's a gap that the Conservatives have to close. And I think that, when he plays to sort of his most natural nastiness, it's not helpful in that regard. The lead that he has now is enough that he can inhabit a slightly more ready for government prime ministerial positioning with greater regularity. And I think that that's probably something he would be wise to try and emphasize. And then the other thing, which hasn't been mentioned yet, but I think is key, is caucus discipline. Like, they've got some pretty nutty people in there, still doing nutty things. And, and I think we saw over the last couple of weeks a little bit of this with Michael Cooper, meeting with the sort of convoy folks. And you had, Garrett Jennings doing whatever he was doing in the House. And this stuff, well, each piece in and of itself is not necessarily a huge problem. Taken cumulatively, it is a vulnerability. It takes them off their message track. And it's something to be avoided. So I think that, well, in general, the huge numbers that Poilievre has been delivering for the Conservatives has kept caucus mostly in line. It still hasn't fully worked. So there's probably a talking to be had there to keep folks on the issues that are resonating for them. And it's not that fringe stuff. It's staying focused on some of those affordability messages. It's the carbon tax stuff. It's those that have really been significant for them. And the other thing I'll say, and this is also to Kory, and I guess it's a bit of a compliment, like, Kory is such a good communicator. Did you see him just pounding down on the NDP there? And that really only happens when there's a recognition that the Conservatives are in these blue-orange fights and the NDP numbers are a threat to them in some of those fights. So I think that the other thing that we're going to see the Conservatives do is increasingly have them turn their guns on Singh to try to capture some of those votes. Now that they feel that they have really squeezed as much as they possibly can out of the Liberals, they're going to be looking elsewhere for those votes. And so we're going to see that more and more as they try to adjust those dials so that they get the right vote splits, and that they can take those ridings. They hope.
All right. Scott, you got any advice for Jenny?
Yeah. I want to go back to what was being said earlier. To me, the great unconquered land for the Conservatives is Quebec. So, I mean, I know that there's a possibility to extract more votes out of BC. I know there's a possibility to extract more votes out of Ontario. I know there's a possibility of topping up your vote with certain demographics and all of these kinds of things. And I recognize all that. But it feels like they are pretty high and these things are at the margin. And maybe some of it will come down to discipline and not losing what people might expect to be lost as you get into a challenging territory and all that. But I think the big place to go is Quebec. Like, if you're this high and you're this strong across the country, you look at that Coletto poll and you kind of go, all right, well, there are lots of things we as a Conservative Party won't do to try to appeal to votes in Quebec, but what could we do? And I think I would do two things in particular, it seems to me. One, I'd fairly soon, because I think you want time to start to bleed into the psyche of Quebec voters, I'd announce 3 rock star, high profile, holy shit, didn't see that coming, Quebecers, Francophone Quebecers as candidates. So that's the first thing. That's easier said than done. But like, if they are working on that, and I'm sure they are, and people like to be in government, so there are probably people coming forward expressing interest, I'd package that up. Not 1, not 2. I'd do like 3 or 4. I would say, look at this. Holy shit. They've got the core of a really impressive Quebec cabinet there.
Step on up Catherine Lubier.
Second thing I would do is Le Nouveau Compact. We know that they can very happily sing this song of constitutional traditionalism, and that will play for them with Danielle Smith, and it's comfortable for where they're at. And I think they could even codify it. They could go for, and I wouldn't like to see this. This is my vision of the country, right? But I think if it's in keeping with theirs, they don't have to compromise what they stand for in order to play to traditional tropes of Quebec. I think they could go forward and say, listen, guys, here, like, you know, it's not constitutionalized, but here's the framework under which we will operate. Here are the areas into which we will not tread. These are the rules that we will govern ourselves by if we are in government. And this is what we mean by keeping to our own playing field as a federal government under Pierre Poilievre. I think that could have some appeal, at least among elites, and get a huge amount of buzz. And as we know in Quebec, elites can influence the political dialogue, which can influence, I think, actually ballot box, particularly in later stages of a campaign when you got momentum. So to me, I would say, well, why not try these two things? Because, like, if the Liberals drop more in Quebec during an election campaign, there is vote to be had there. And I'd go hunting if I were them.
Well, you can pound more on immigration to help you in Quebec, and I think it's probably going to help you everywhere else in the country right now too.
Well, that would be example number one, exhibit number one, as to how you would conduct yourself differently when it comes to federal-provincial relations and respect for constitutional structure.
All right, Scott, let's stick with you. Since you went last on that one, other than changing their leader, what do the NDP need to do this fall?
Sorry, I want to say one thing more about the Conservatives. That Garnet
Genuous
guy, okay? To hell with him.
Not genius, right? Genuous.
I just want to say I want to draw a circle around it, right? This conduct in the House, and people say all sorts of stupid things. But if there's one thing I really, really, really despise, it's a coward. And when you yell something out, right, like that.
Wait a second. I thought you liked me.
Then you pretend you didn't say it. Then when it's inevitable and inescapable that you did say it, you said that what you said didn't mean what everybody fucking knows it said. You are nutless. You are a coward. You do not have the convictions that you pretend to have. So I got nothing for that guy. NDP. What would I say about the NDP? I don't know, man. I don't know. I mean, I think they are really well positioned structurally. I just don't know that I don't know what to do about Singh. I think I would start talking about middle class appeal. I'd start talking about a tax cut. I'd start trying to sound like David Eby and start talking about cutting taxes. And I would add more window dressing to the hint that they would retreat from the carbon tax and just hope to further advantage your ability to hop some votes. What I don't know, though, and this is where what I said might just be stupid. What I don't know, at least the carbon tax part of it, I don't know if the votes that are likely to slide from the Liberals to them might still be the last remaining few patriots of the consumer carbon tax. So I don't know how, and I take a look at where they could be competitive to pick up additional Liberal votes that might actually harness them seats. So I don't know what the issue set there is. And so you need to do some pretty heavy duty crosstabbing to guide that appeal.
Right. Jordan, I mean, this is actually now turning into...
But they should change leaders.
Yeah. I mean, Jordan, this is, it feels like a changed circumstance a little bit to me. Because, we've been talking about this for a long time. Liberals losing to conservatives, NDP losing, to liberals, blah, blah. But with this situation now, again, where it is possible, both in vote terms and seat terms, that the NDP could pass the Liberals, and that this is really the holy grail of NDP political aspirations. I don't mean that negatively. Sorry, I don't mean that chippily. I don't mean that as a minimal aspiration. I was going to say,
I think it's a minimal aspiration.
Well, it is step one toward forming the government of Canada, right? And is to displace the Liberals. And so that's, to me, it feels like a holy fuck. Let's not just continue to put one foot in front of the other the way we were, and go into an 18-point election trying to get 21 points. Let's fucking see if we can use this moment to change politics in Canada.
Yeah. I think it is really important to underline, and I would say maybe even just the psychological importance of the NDP passing the Liberals outside of Quebec, because joking aside, that it is a significant milestone because, I think for a lot of voters who are strategic voters, people who are thinking about the best way to block the Conservatives, they're looking at viability, right? And this is often where the NDP struggles because they're not seen as being viable to beat the Liberals. But once you have that hop happening, then they start to compete in terms of viability. And I think that, we saw this ahead of 2015, where the NDP win in Alberta provided some lift in terms of the party's sense of viability in the rest of Canada that fed into very strong positioning ahead of that election, which obviously they weren't able to close the deal on then. But it is like you can sense some of those similar pieces are now beginning to fall into place. And I think, in terms of the numbers that they have going in terms of their structural positioning, yeah, you're right, it is good. And I think when you look historically, kicking around 20% is actually a pretty strong standing heading into an election for the party. Prior to 2011, I was there and we were around 13, right? And so things really can shift when that collapse happens on the Liberal side, and things can move very quickly. So this is also where provincial races can be significant. They can feed into the sense of viability. And so I think that is a really important moment. So in terms of what they need to do just in the short term over the next 3 months, job one is to continue to put distance between themselves and the Liberals. They need to continue to make it very clear that they are not the lackeys of the Liberals, that there is a difference in what they're doing, what they're saying. And I think that for all the kind of critiques there's been of Singh's positioning when how he broke up the confidence and supply agreement, one of the reasons that they chose to make the language so hot and to do it in such a big way was so that voters are very clear on what has happened. And you could make the argument that that was really helpful for them, I think, in the by-election in Winnipeg. So having that strong differentiation is going to be important. I think they need to stay focused on affordability issues. So yes, considering things like tax cuts is important. I would say that is actually something that you see fairly regularly from provincial NDP parties. This is bread and butter of the Manitoba NDP government. This is actually something also that, when Jack Layton campaigned, was a regular feature of his platforms as well. So it's not anathema for the federal party, and they need to go back and look at some of those things and where they can provide something that shows that they're responding to those affordability concerns for voters. I think they also need to be talking about jobs. We're entering a period where economic concern is going to be centered around unemployment, around precarity. And so they have a really good opportunity to go out and sort of own that issue, because Lord knows the Liberals aren't going to do it. And it's also an opportunity for them to speak to unionized workers as well in a voice that's different from what they're hearing from the Conservatives. I think they need to continue to be alert over the next 3 months to opportunities to squeeze the bejesus out of the Liberals. So getting that pharmacare to the finish line and having some of their signature on it is going to be good for them. So they shouldn't lose that. I think that the Bloc did make a bit of an error in terms of putting some hardness around their deadlines and things like that very early on without necessarily leaving a lot of space for negotiation. So there's an opportunity coming up where the NDP can maybe now be in a bit of a power position again. And they should use it. They should twist that and squeeze everything they can. And then they also have to do some of the things on the org and the fundraising side. So they've got to, again, be nominating high quality candidates as fast as they can. They need to continue to build on some of the gains that they've seen in fundraising to get the war chest ready, so that when they are in a position to go, they can do so with confidence that they'll be running fully funded, and that they'll be able to communicate their message with money behind it as they need to throughout the course of the campaign.
There you go. Good prescription. Now, Kory, what about you? What would you do if you were the NDP?
I'd get rid of Singh, first and foremost. Like, I do think they have an opportunity here, but I don't think with him. And I'll make the prediction yet again. I don't think he's going to win a seat. I don't think he's going to win his own personal seat, which I think will be a great favor to the NDP, and removing him from politics. Look, the federal NDP. There's such great examples of what they should be doing, how they should be communicating, how they should be positioning themselves if they look to the provincial parties, and I just don't see them doing any of it. Like, I think it is a fucking dream to think that they're going to own anything on unemployment or anything even tangentially related to the economy vis-a-vis Polyev. Like, I don't think people would hire Singh for anything related to the economy. And I think, they need somebody who can do that. And I think there are like lots of somebodies out there who've demonstrated the ability to do that in NDP land. He's just not one of them. And to say that they need to spend some time on fundraising.
Maybe they can recruit somebody. Do they have their own carny?
Well, yeah. Well, look, I think you've got to, if he's not leaving, which he's obviously not, that's all the advice that you had for Scott had for how to improve Polyev's fortunes in Quebec. You could apply all of that to the NDP, broaden out the team, get some other big names in there, recruit some people from your provincial parties to show that there's more than just this one guy you don't like very much. But the contradiction around being an agent of change and also having been the conspirator in chief for keeping collaborator in chief and keeping this government around is really, I think, too heavy a lift, even for somebody who had communication skills, which he doesn't. So, like, on the fundraising side, to say that you need to spend some time doing that to be able to fight a fully funded campaign, they don't have enough fucking cash on hand to run a fully funded campaign in two ridings. Like, that's how little money they have. So I got to say, there's a huge opportunity there. I think they're going to squander it. Anyway, leadership.
The hotter Kory is, the more I like their chances.
I saw your face. Right. I saw your face, Jordan. But there's no question. Both the Liberals and the NDP are working with duct tape and binder twine compared to the Conservatives.
Well, listen. I mean, New Democrats bring nothing if not like a big dandelion energy to all of their work. They are just fucking unkillable and very persistent. And so I think that Kory's arguments around cash on hand ignore obviously a pretty substantial component of modern campaigning, i.e. loans. So they are going to run a fully funded campaign. That's not a problem. And in terms of recruiting candidates, we have just seen over the last week, they've got now 3 sitting MPPs in Ontario who are going to be running for them federally. So they are taking some of that advice. And I think that they remain well positioned. They do need to build on the fundraising momentum. That's going to be important because one of the things that NDP campaigns often have a challenge with is that if they get into a good position and they're able to achieve liftoff during the campaign, which is typically more possible because during a campaign, resources and coverage tend to equalize a little bit more in a way that does favor the NDP relative to other parties, then you enter into the last week of the campaign. And that's where, and I know I'm looking at 2 people over here who've done this many a time. That's where often the Liberals particularly are able to pull down the NDP's numbers in that last week. And so you have to keep gas in the tank to defend whatever lead you're able to carve out through that last period. And that's something that is a bit of a resource allocation challenge that has happened through various campaigns that has been a lesson learned. So I think that these are really nuances in terms of what they need to be doing in terms of their resource planning, but there's no question that they're going to run a fully funded campaign. And I think they're already taking some of Kory's advice.
Let me pull on that thread because I think that's just utter bullshit, to be honest. It's not going to be a fully funded campaign. You can't look at a campaign and say it's fully funded if you're only talking about the central campaign, if you're not talking about the money in the ridings. And if you're, so to do that, you're saying they're going to have a fully funded central campaign because they're going to take out a loan for that. Okay, sure. Where's the pre-writ campaign? Non-existent. That's what's going on right now. There's only one party that's running a pre-writ campaign, which I think anyone managing a campaign will tell you is more important than the actual campaign, is the pre-writ campaign. They're not running one because they don't have any fucking money. And they're not going to raise enough money to run fully funded campaigns in all the riding associations. There's just no fucking way, Jordan. There is no way they're going to close that gap. Like, you can't, with a straight face
Kory,
say
there's
that.
No party that runs a fully funded campaign in every riding.
Yes, they do.
All right, Points made. I have this idea, though, about the confidence motions. And tell me, Scott, if I'm crazy about this. What if the NDP, to get out of the shit of the confidence motions this fall, we're honest with Canadians and said, Canadians need an alternative to Poilievre. It's not Trudeau. They need an alternative to Poilievre. We're not ready to provide that alternative in an election campaign yet, and we're giving ourselves a deadline of the new year to do that. So we're going to vote against confidence motions in the new year, full stop, and try to bring down the government. This fall, we're not, because we're focusing on getting ourselves ready to win an election campaign.
I'm not sure it's necessary. I'm not certain that people are paying close enough attention to the minutiae of politics. I'm not sure that people are consuming media in a way that's substantial enough that there's an upside to that message, and it's going to shift people's openness to them as compared to just managing it, vote by vote. I think if you were going to do that, you would need to add to it. You would need to say, here's the things we are waiting to complete this piece of legislative agenda, and we are going to make a handful of announcements about ourselves and our intentions prior to the next election, and we're going to take the next 5 months to do that or something. And therefore, as of March 1st, we will begin to withdraw our confidence in the government. So no matter what the BQ is doing or whatever, at that point, we're done. I don't know if it's February 1st, March 1st, January 3rd, Valentine's Day might be nice, like whatever the hell they decide to set it at, right? But I think you would go that way. But then you've restricted your strategic options depending on circumstance. So I don't know.
I hate it.
All right.
I hate it.
You hate it? Okay.
I hate it.
Okay, you hate it. All right, so let's quickly do this clipping so we get our clipping in here. It's a change of pace from this conversation a bit. It's kind of a tragic comedy TikTok of a piece. It's Justin Ling in the Toronto Star in an article called How the Liberals Fumbled Canada's Most Effective Climate Plan. Canada's once lauded carbon pricing program began falling apart soon after it was set up in 2019. Today, thanks to government incompetence and a relentless bad faith campaign to destroy it, it is really falling apart. I've followed the promise of and backlash to the Liberals' deeply flawed, largely successful, and seemingly doomed carbon pricing plan from the beginning. In recent months, I've spoken to architects of the regime, including Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, his first Environment Minister Catherine McKenna, and his longtime right-hand man Gerald Butts, about what went wrong and why. What I heard was a story of a good policy undermined by a cynical conservative campaign, sold badly by the Trudeau government, and eventually failed by a government that couldn't be bothered justifying one of its own marquee initiatives. Then there's a Butts intervention here. The federal government was negotiating with the provinces on how to implement the national price on carbon. Most of the premiers around the table already had some version of the same policy in place, or were at least receptive to the idea. But there was one naysayer, Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall. Butts pointed to Wall as the ghost of conservative future. That's the base the National Party will build back from, Butts told his colleagues. So listen to what Brad Wall is saying. Some in Trudeau's government were convinced they didn't need to listen. They were so buoyed by polls showing widespread support for climate action that they were ignoring the more sobering data underneath. Canadians wanted climate action, sure, but they were loath to pay more in taxes to make it happen. I will stop there. I'll end with, I've been speaking to Liberal MPs who are exasperated that one of the party's signature policies, a real legacy initiative, is falling apart. How are you fucking up something that people actually care about? One MP asked. The fight isn't over, the same MP said. There is a way to thread the needle. Jordan, what's your takeaway from that article?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ling does a really good job of laying out many of the factors that went into it. And I think I was struck quite a bit by what McKenna said. And I don't know if this is revisionist history. None of us were in the room, obviously. But the idea
It is.
but far be it from me to suggest people are telling different stories now that things have gone sideways. But the notion that it would occur to you to have to brand these payments to people, and that you would go to CRA and they would just say, oh, it's not possible. And you would say, all right, and move on with your day, strikes me as batshit. So some of the pieces of this storytelling, and by that I mean the story that the Liberals are telling themselves about the genesis of this failure, don't quite add up to me. I think that Ling does a good job of plumbing some of the options that are in front of the Liberals in terms of adjusting things on this, but I don't think any of it fucking matters, because I think that Trudeau is so personally wedded to this policy and views it as such an integral part of his own personal legacy that the chances that they are going to want to deviate from it in any significant way are vanishingly small. So I think it's an interesting piece of political history and certainly telling about those narratives internally. I'm not sure how useful it is to them, because they don't have a time machine. And really what it points to is the need for work to have been done 3, 4, 5, even 8 years ago that just was not done. And none of that is really fixable for them now.
Scott, I think they've missed the underlying point, which is, yes, this policy could have been better communicated and better messaged, but it could never have been sold. A endlessly rising tax on people in a bad economic environment, in any economic environment. I mean, people just don't get elected on promises to raise taxes.
Yeah, exactly right. When I read this story, and I think Justin Ling has done yeoman service in pulling people together, giving us a thoughtful examination of what folks who were there at the time, not everybody, but lots of people that are important, have to say now. But turns out we knew all along. We saw it all along, could see into the future. Brad Wall anecdote, oh my God, look at him, man, I'm peering around the corner. This is how it's going to go. Saw it all along. Second, the real failing here, conveniently, is that it was improperly communicated and inadequately defended. Okay. Throw in, as Jordan points out, a little dash of spice that picks up on the contemporary, completely missing the point, and I think erroneous argument of, if only the payments were correctly labeled, then support for this policy would be buoyant. And those stubborn CRA bureaucrats, they really put Canada behind an 8 ball, and this government was powerless. I mean, the combination of all these things I find a bit rich. And then to top it all off, God love me, he's a friend of ours, but then Jerry's at the end kind of going, man, might not be too late to join Europe and bail on the consumer carbon tax. Talk about ghost of future yet to come. Fuck me. So I don't know. I don't have a lot more to add. I think I don't take this with a grain of salt. I take it with a boulder of salt, and I'll stop talking about it now.
Kory, they thought they had won this fight in 2015. They thought that they had run on this policy and been elected on this policy, and therefore Canadians supported this policy.
Yeah, but all you had to do was run a poll to know that wasn't true. This policy has never been popular. And it's one of the great gifts that the Liberal Party has given Conservatives across the country is a carbon tax. It's it has never been popular, but also when you actually speak on this, you have one party that's speaking basically since its inception for 45% of the country, and you had 3 other parties dividing up the other 45% that liked it. That's a perfect wedge if you're a politician running for office.
Yeah.
I get the Olympic sized swimming pool, and I get to splash around alone. And now it's not 45% that's in support of it. It's something much less than that, as other provincial leaders and other party leaders have come out against it. You've really backed yourself into a corner around this, and we've covered this so many times in the past, guys. But there are so many other climate policies on display in other countries that are doing better in meeting their climate change targets, that are using mechanisms other than a carbon tax, which is really unpopular. So I just don't see where the argument for continuing down this road is. The carbon tax is going to be gone after the next election, for sure. So, if you're talking about a legacy piece, I hate to tell it, if Justin Trudeau, if you're listening, it's gone. It's going. It's going. It doesn't matter who. There's no version of the universe that unfolds. It doesn't mean that this thing is gone. And it should be, what are you going to replace it with? And so if you're talking about, future oriented things, if we bring this back to where we started in terms of advice for the Liberals, I would be, would have started some time ago. I would be coming up with what that alternative policy looks like. And maybe you have a debate around that pulls people into a conversation where they say, all right, I like your climate change plan better than Poilievre's climate change plan because you got something in the window. But if the only thing in the window is this most egregious, unpopular policy, no one's going to have a conversation about Poilievre's climate change plan, because his climate change plan, rather, is no carbon tax. And everyone likes that quite a lot.
All right. I think that probably sums it up. Let's move to Mr. Pinsent and our Hey Yous.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
All right. Who wants to go first?
All right. I'll go first. We saw some headlines around foreign interference and pretty damning stuff. The latest Chase Fife story about who knew what when and what did they do with it. All very damning stuff. But I don't want to dwell on that. I want to talk about one other thing, which links to Garnet Genuis in a weird way. Because I remember when we were going through this before, he was the king of junkets in terms of the Conservative Party, but far from alone. I don't want to single him out too much. But if I were an MP, if I were a political party in Ottawa, I would be proactively going out there and saying the foreign junkets business is over. It's always been gross and slimy. I think it's much more than gross and slimy now. There's no trip from Qatar, the Qatari government. The Canadians are going to be, excited about you having taken, or Taiwan, or we can go through the list. I think it's gross. I think it should be banned. I do think it is.
But it's a great opportunity to learn about the Qatar healthcare system, Kory.
Right? Yeah. Right. Yeah. Said no one ever. Said no one ever. So, look, I think this is a great opportunity to say, what, if you want to go on a vacation, pay for your own vacation. If you want to go on a fact-finding mission to something, do it through a parliamentary committee and have the government of Canada pay for it, if it's actually legitimate. But I don't think you would see a lot of that, because I don't think these things are ever legitimate. I think it's a junk pit. It's not good. Don't do it.
Okay. Jordan?
So my Hey You this week is going out to the BC NDP War Room, who had, I think, a really excellent, poetic level, excellent hit last Monday, where they released a video of Rustad saying that he regretted his COVID vaccination and completely stomped all over his major housing and tax policy announcement. And it's good oppo is so much an art and not a science. And sometimes it's actually harder when you have so much ammunition. And this was certainly the experience in Alberta, where there were obviously files and files and files about opposition on Danielle Smith, but it can be a real challenge if the kookiness becomes baked in the minds of voters. So you have to be thoughtful about how you deploy it. And I think that what they did last Monday on that, and this is a shout out going out to Matt Hanna and the team there, was textbook. It was excellent. And so just a shout out on a point of craft to them for that.
Okay. Scott?
Two Hey Yous quickly. Very, very quick one. Our buddy Art Millens reminds me that tomorrow, October 1st, be Jimmy Carter's 100th birthday. So he was hoping the pod would give a thumbs up to Jimmy Carter for turning 100. I think that's pretty cool, man. Hey, way to go, Jimmy. Not building too many houses these days, but 100. What a mark. And it's Truth and Reconciliation Day. So I'll just say this. Go to DowneyWenjack.ca and donate some money. The Cheney Wenjack, Gord Downey, coming out of that initiative that Gord had as his last project before the Hips Funnel Tour, Secret Path, which was done with the great Canadian illustrator Jeff Lemire. So go there, donate some money, relieve some of your guilt, and do some good.
Here, here.
Excellent. Mine is related in the sense that the person I think about today is Phil Fontaine. Phil has done so much to promote the cause of Indigenous people in Canada and promote reconciliation in Canada. He's been a longtime friend of mine, and he sure taught me a lot, both about Indigenous life in Canada and Indigenous policy. Wonderful guy, still doing it, still out there working. Love you, Phil. Hey, you. All right. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, Telus, our sponsor, CN Rail. I'd like to thank the three of you, especially Kory. God bless you, man. This was yeoman service, and you fought through it very, very impressively. And thank all of you accursed out there who watched or listened to this program. And we'll be back next week. And my God, maybe we'll be positive.
I doubt it.
I don't know what you're talking about, David. I'm always positive.